Elara's hand flew to her throat as she jolted awake and saw the Alpha King on her cabin floor. Rowan lay between her bed and the door like a fallen sentinel, broad shoulders pressed against the rough planks, one arm stretched toward the frame as if he died reaching for anyone who might dare to enter. For a breath, sleep lured him into a stranger, just another warrior too tired to stand. And then the familiar weight of his scent cedar, smoke, and the sharp metallic edge of steel slammed into her chest. Her pulse tripped, not because he was here, but because of the way he'd come. Boots still on, jaw shadowed with exhaustion, his body curled not in comfort but in a guard's poised, miserable half-rest. There was a smear of dried blood at his knuckles. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The room held its breath with her. The cabin was small enough that his presence rearranged the air. Browned walls and low rafters bending themselves around the impossible fact of him. The door behind his shoulder was still barred from the inside. He hadn't slipped in while she slept and left again. He had placed his body between her and anyone who might come through that door. And at some point, the king of all Northland had simply folded there, on the floor, in her exile cabin, like a shield someone had dropped. Elara swallowed against the raw tightness in her throat and pushed the worn blanket off her legs, every movement slow, as if any sound might wake him and shatter the fragile unreality of the moment. She shifted to the edge of the bed, bare toes sinking into the old wool rug. The boards beneath the rug creaked with age, but Rowan didn't stir. Of course he can sleep through a war, she thought, that familiar mix of admiration and resentment curling in her chest. He has been doing it since the night he put a crown above our bond. She hadn't meant to think the word "ah." It slipped out of the place she kept carefully bandaged, the place the moon had burned a mark into her palm, and into the very marrow of her bones the night she realized the Alpha King was her mate. And hours later he rejected the bond without ever looking at her hand. That had been in the great stone hall in front of witnesses. Ceremonial torches, the council, the old seer repeating the prophecy that demanded an alliance, demanded a queen, demanded heirs. She remembered the way Rowan's jaw had clenched when the bond flared between them, the way his eyes had flashed molten gold for a single traitorous heartbeat, and then gone cold as winter steel as he stepped back. "You will have my name," he had said. "My protection, my kingdom. But the moon's choice does not rule mine." He had given her every part of him but the one that mattered. And then, quietly, without spectacle, he had buried her in duties, corridors, and the lonely half-light at the edge of his throne. "So why are you on my floor?" Elara's fingers curled in the blanket, nails biting into her own skin. Why now? Why here? She let herself look at him properly, as she never allowed herself to at court. In the palace, there was always someone watching, eyes in the rafters, whispers in side halls, the ever-present hunger of the council measuring how far apart the king and his unwanted queen stood. Here, there was only the cabin, the faint scent of banked embers from last night's fire, and Rowan's massive frame stretched between her and the rest of the world. He had slept restlessly. The lines at the corners of his mouth were deeper than she remembered. His dark hair, usually tied back with royal precision, had come loose, one ink-black strand fallen across his brow. The wolf beneath his skin showed in small betrayals, the faint twitch at his fingers, the restless shift of his chest as if, even in sleep, he was scenting the air for threat. The dried blood on his knuckles was not his. Elara's heart stuttered. She saw suddenly what she had missed in the stunned first seconds. The faint scuff marks near the doorframe. The splintered wood where claws or a blade had bitten into it. The dark smear on the lower plank at shoulder height, just where someone would hit if Rowan had slammed them back. Someone tried to come in. Memory stuttered. She remembered locking the door last night, fingers clumsy with exhaustion after the 2-day ride from the capital. Remembered insisting on staying in the mountain cabin instead of the local manor offered to her as a guest, because at least this cabin was hers, even if it had been given to her as a polite exile. Remembered sinking into the narrow bed and promising herself she would only rest her eyes for a moment before she unpacked the correspondence and the reports, and the list of border grievances she'd been forced to come here to smooth. She had meant to stay awake. She had meant to keep her own watch. The bond must have tugged her under anyway. Or perhaps it had been simple bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that no amount of pride could fend off. And while she slept, the Alpha King had fought something at her door. Elara's gaze tracked the ghost of that battle in the room, piecing it together the way she would one of the council's twisted decrees. The smear on the floor where a body had likely been dragged. The broken edge of the chair she'd left propped under the latch, now splintered clean in two. The thin scent of unfamiliar wolf, gone mostly stale now, like rock cut through with iron. He didn't just happen to be here. Her stomach folded over itself. She set one foot down, then the other, standing slowly. The cabin pressed close around her low ceiling, narrow walls, the single window that overlooked the pines beyond. Rowan's body was a dark line between her and the door, his cloak thrown partly over him, as if at some point in the long hours he shifted from standing to braced half-sitting, then finally slumped sideways and given in. Elara took a careful step closer, studying his face. Up close, the years since the bond had carved themselves into him more clearly. There was silver threaded at his temples now, not enough to age him, but enough to prove that even kings could not keep time from their hair. A faint scar she had never seen before tugged at the edge of his bottom lip, as if someone had once split it in battle. How many nights like this have there been that I never saw? She wondered, the thought an unwelcome ember in her chest. How many battles fought in corridors and shadows to keep me breathing, while he stayed far enough away in the light that I could pretend he didn't care. She shouldn't care either. That had been the rule she set for herself after the rejection. She would be his queen by treaty, not by heart. She would serve the kingdom, not the man. She would not crave the touch of a hand that had signed her fate away. Yet here she was, barefoot in a cramped cabin, heart pounding because Rowan Thorne, Alpha King of the Northern Court, had chosen the floor instead of the palace bed he never shared with her. And that choice had been made for her, not for show. She realized with a jolt that she could see the faint tremor in his fingers where they lay open on the planks, palm up, claws just shy of unsheathing. Wolves did not sleep like that unless they had been awake far too long. You stayed all night, she thought, an ache pressing under her ribs. You held the door. Her hand moved of its own accord, reaching toward his face. She wanted to brush that stray lock of hair back, to see his eyes without the shield of his usual perfect composure, to prove, selfishly, that he was truly here, that this was not just another cruel dream, where he looked at her like she was something worth breaking himself for. Her fingers hovered inches from his temple. "Don't," Rowan said quietly, eyes still closed. Elara's breath caught. She snatched her hand back as if burned. His lashes lifted. Gold cut through the grey of his irises in a sudden, sharp flare, the wolf rising faster than the man. It softened a heartbeat later as he focused on her, but the first thing she saw in his eyes was not anger, not disdain, not even the cool distance he'd perfected at court. It was relief. "Good," he murmured, voice rough with sleep and something older. "You're awake." Her spine straightened on instinct. "Your Majesty." For a second, something like hurt flickered across his face. It was there and gone too quickly to be sure. He pushed himself upright with a grunt, every line of his body protesting, as he braced one hand on the wall and the other on his knee. The cloak slid off his shoulders, revealing a shirt sleeve torn at the bicep and another smear of blood that definitely wasn't his. "You're bleeding," she said before she could stop herself. He glanced down, then shook his head. "Not mine, I guessed," she replied, the words sharper than she intended. "You're too careful for that." His mouth pressed into a line. "Carefulness has little to do with it. The thing that tried your door last night was sloppy. Overconfident." Elara's chest tightened. "What thing?" He studied her as he straightened fully, stretching to his full, imposing height. In the throne room, he always felt like he filled the entire hall. Here, in the cramped cabin, he seemed almost too large for the space, the air bending around his shoulders. "A wolf who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near you," Rowan said. "Or anyone in these mountains." Cold sank into her limbs, doing what the mountain air had not managed to do all night. "Rogue?" He tilted his head, listening to the room like it might answer for him. The gold in his eyes flickered again. "The wolf scenting." "Not quite. I'd call him a hound on a leash he believed was longer than it is." Elara felt her patience fray. "I would appreciate fewer riddles and more answers, Your Majesty." His jaw worked. That, at least, was familiar. He had always chosen silence over speech, steel over explanation. But this time, perhaps because the space was too small for formality to fit comfortably between them, he gave her more. "He carried the king's road dust on his boots," Rowan said. "That means he didn't come through the northern passes. He came from the capital." The capital. Home and prison in one. Elara's stomach flipped. "You're saying someone from court sent a wolf after me?" "I'm saying," Rowan replied, gaze never leaving her face, "that a trained wolf who reeked of the palace yards and council incense tried to break into your cabin in the middle of the night. And when I asked him who sent him, he fell briefly silent." "What?" she pressed. Rowan's eyes darkened. He said, "Everyone who was tired of the Queen staying alive." The room tilted. Elara gripped the bedpost until her knuckles whitened. She had expected hostility from the council when Rowan sent her to the border under the guise of appeasing disputes between mountain clans. She had expected isolation, whispers, maybe an attempt to undermine her authority with the local alphas. She had not expected an assassin sent like a common hound to her door. "Is he dead?" Her voice surprised her. It sounded steady. Rowan's gaze flicked to the door, then back. "No. No?" The word came out sharper. "You let him go?" "I bound him," Rowan said, "and handed him to those who will drag the truth out of him more cleanly than shattered bones would. The commander here owes me 2 favors. He'll use them wisely." So there was a commander. There were soldiers nearby. Somehow, the knowledge that she hadn't been entirely alone, prey in an empty forest, did nothing to soothe her. "And you stayed," she said slowly. "Here, on the floor." His eyes shuttered. "There was no one else I trusted to hold that door until dawn." It should have been a simple statement. A king discussing logistics, nothing more. But something in the way he said trusted, in the way the words scraped across his teeth like a confession, made the skin between her ribs ache. "You trust me enough to leave me, but not enough to love me," she thought bitterly. "You trust yourself enough to bleed at my door, but not enough to share my bed." She straightened, drawing her composure around her like a cloak. "You had to ride hard to reach the mountain border from the capital in time to stop him." His brow furrowed. "Elara, how long have you been tracking threats to my life that you never spoke of?" she asked quietly. He went very still. The silence stretched. Once, she would have rushed to fill it, to smooth the edges of whatever rough thing lay between them. But she was not the girl who had stood in silver and white under the council's gaze, waiting for the man she loved to either accept or destroy their bond. She was the queen they had carved from that girl instead, sharper now, edges honed by 7 years of court and cold and carefully measured words. Long enough, Rowan said finally. But that is not what matters right now. Funny, Elara replied softly. It feels relevant from where I'm standing. His mouth twitched, humorless. Of course it does. You've always cared more about why a thing happens than simply that it happened. Is that a flaw? She asked. It is one of the reasons the council fears you more than they ever admit, he said. The admission stole her breath. They don't fear me. They fear that you see through them, Rowan corrected. And that you are, somehow, still willing to bleed for the kingdom they keep trying to twist into their own shape. Her throat tightened. Starved for affection, refusing to beg. He saw her then. At least this much. Then why give them what they wanted? She asked. Why send me here alone? They've been whispering about moving the Queen out of the capital since the fires in the East Wing. You let them. His jaw hardened. For a moment, the gold in his eyes brightened, a flash of fury not directed at her. Because here, their hands are shorter. And yet one still reached my door, she said, and found me there instead of you. The words landed between them with a weight that made it hard to breathe. Elara looked away first, focusing on the battered table by the small hearth. The kettle sat there, still half full from last night. Reflex had her moving, grateful for something to do, for something that wasn't staring at the man who kept finding new, more complicated ways to stand between her and danger. You need water on those hands, she said, reaching for the kettle. Elara. Sit, she cut in, surprising them both. He blinked. You guarded my door, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Let me at least make sure you don't leave half your skin on my floor. For a heartbeat, she thought he would refuse on pride alone. A king did not take orders in a cabin kitchen. But then something in his shoulders eased, very slightly, as if the fight had gone out of him hours ago, and only the habit of resistance remained. He dragged the single chair away from the table and lowered himself into it. It creaked under his weight. Elara set the kettle on the small iron stand near the embers to warm, and fetched the basin from the shelf, filling it with the last of the cool water from the jug. The ordinary motion steadied her. This she understood. Washing wounds, setting fractured things as straight as possible. She had done it in the palace infirmary when the healers were overwhelmed, in the barracks after a training gone wrong, even once on the council steps when a messenger had fallen and torn his palm open delivering news. She had never done it for her husband. She set the basin on the table and reached for his hand. The moment her fingers closed around his wrist, the bond flared. It didn't crash into her like it had the first night, in a blaze of moon-white certainty. 7 years of neglect had taught it patience, endurance. Now it rose slow and inexorable, like heat from coals banked carefully under ash. Her pulse leapt anyway. The leather of his bracer was worn smooth beneath her touch, the skin at his wrist hot and solid. Rowan inhaled, sharp and quiet. Does it still hurt? She asked, keeping her eyes on his knuckles. What? The bond, she said, and cursed herself for the question as soon as it left her mouth. Silence folded over them. She could feel his gaze on the side of her face, see it in the way his hand flexed once under hers, and then forced itself to stillness. Some things, he said at last, voice low, don't hurt less just because you stop speaking of them. Her throat burned. I don't remember the last time you spoke of it at all, she said, trying for cool and landing somewhere closer to raw. It didn't seem a kindness, he replied. To whom? She asked. His mouth twisted. To either of us. She swallowed the sharp retort that leapt to her tongue. What kindness had there been in pretending the bond did not exist, while every cell in her body knew exactly where he was in a room? What gentleness was there in standing side by side at public ceremonies? his hand resting over hers on the ceremonial sword, when not an hour later he would walk past her chambers without pausing. She dipped a cloth into the water, wrung it out, and began wiping the blood from his knuckles. The crimson swirled into the basin, looming like smoke. Was he alone? She asked after a moment. The wolf at the door. For now, Rowan said. But hounds seldom hunt alone for long. That's reassuring, she muttered. His mouth twitched, and this time there was a flash of something almost like humor. You're in more danger from the council's gossip than their blades. Elara, they like their knives in words, not steel. Words can cut deeper, she said. I know, he replied quietly. She glanced up. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the cabin shrank, the world shrinking to the point where his gaze held hers. Longing rushed up, swift and unwelcome. There were so many things she could have said in that moment, about nights alone, about carrying the weight of a crown that had never fully settled on her head, about the way his absence had taught her to stand straight, even as it hollowed her out. Instead, she cleared her throat and straightened. You said for now, she said. Does that mean you expect more hounds? I expect that whoever sent him will not give up after one failed attempt, Rowan said. It takes time to move pieces from the capital to the border, but they've been patient already. How long? She asked. He hesitated. Rowan. The use of his name did what her title had not. His gaze sharpened. Months, he admitted. The first threats were clumsy. Anonymous notes. Rumors of poison. I shut those down quietly. Then came the fires in the East Wing. Elara's stomach clenched. She could still smell the smoke some nights, feel the heat licking the stone, hear the panicked screams echoing off marble as they evacuated the wing. I thought that was an accident, she said. So did I, Rowan replied, until I found the sigil burned into the stone beneath the char. It was an old mark, one the council likes to pretend they don't use anymore. And you didn't tell me. He exhaled through his nose. I told you everything was under control. It should have been. Control. The word tasted bitter. So sending me to the mountains was your idea of control. Sending you where I could narrow the paths to you, he said. Where the council would think you'd been sidelined, and thus ease their pressure. Where I could put people I trust on the roads leading in and out. And yet, she gestured to the door. And yet, he echoed, jaw tight. I misjudged how desperate they've become. Silence settled again. Heavier now. Thick with unspoken things. Elara finished cleaning his hands and reached for a strip of linen, wrapping it carefully around the worst of the scrapes. His skin was hot under her fingers. Wolves healed fast, but even wolves needed a moment to breathe. Thank you, he said quietly when she tied the knot. You're welcome, Your Majesty, she replied. He flinched, just barely. Elara, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a promise he'd never quite made. When we step outside this cabin, you will call me Your Majesty as much as you like. But in here, her pulse thudded in her ears. Whatever is written there, Rowan said softly, standing close enough now that she could feel the heat of him at her back. Remember that ink does not make a thing true. She didn't trust herself to speak. With careful fingers, she broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The script was precise, elegant, and cold. To Her Grace Elara of Thorn, Queen of the Northern Court by treaty and bond, in light of recent disturbances and concerns regarding the stability of the realm, the Council has resolved that it is in the best interest of the kingdom that you remain at the northern border, indefinitely assuming the role of Wardness of the Wilds. As such, your presence in the capital is no longer required. Furthermore, in order to preserve the strength of the throne and ensure the continuation of the royal line, the Council has advised His Majesty to consider a secondary consort, to be chosen from the daughters of the high houses currently in residence at court. We trust you will receive this resolution with the grace and loyalty you have always shown the realm. In service to the North, High Counselor Varon, Elara's vision narrowed to the black slash of the word consort. Indefinitely. No longer required. Secondary. The words stacked in her chest like stones. She reread the letter twice, not because she hadn't understood it the first time, but because some stubborn part of her still believed that if she looked hard enough, she'd find a line where they'd crossed it out. Said it was a mistake, admitted the cruelty and took it back. They hadn't. Elara. Rowan's voice was low. What does it say? She swallowed, forced air into her lungs and handed him the parchment. He read quickly, eyes scanning the lines. As he reached the mention of a secondary consort, his grip tightened, crumpling the delicate paper at the edge. The gold in his eyes flared hot and bright. For a moment, she thought he might shift right there in her cabin from fury alone. They dare, he said softly, dangerously. They've wanted this for a long time, Elara said, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. Now they think they finally have you cornered enough to force your hand. They never had my hand, Rowan growled. They had my patience. That is not the same thing. She almost smiled. Almost. You did, however, send me here alone. That part they clearly enjoyed. His eyes snapped to hers. I sent you here to keep you alive. And they turned it into my banishment, she replied. The hurt slipped through her composure then. Quick and sharp. Not because of the border, not because of the title wardness. The wild suited her better than the marble hall ever had. But because of the ease with which the council had tried to replace her in ink. A secondary consort. Another woman in her place. Another mate for the man the moon had already tied to her. You will not be replaced, Rowan said fiercely, as if he'd plucked the thought straight from her chest. You can't stop them from parading their daughters in front of you, she said. You never have. I can stop them from touching the throne, he replied. I can stop them from touching me. You already did, she thought. Years ago. Aloud, she said, the council doesn't send letters like this unless they believe they can make you bend. They are about to learn otherwise, Rowan said. He turned away, pacing the length of the cabin in 3 strides and back again. Energy crackled off him, the wolf bristling under his skin. For a moment she saw not the distant king who made careful, measured choices, but the warrior she'd first fallen in love with a young alpha stepping into a throne room he hadn't. She wanted eyes blazing with a determination so fierce it had stolen her breath. Rowan, she said softly, you can't storm the council chamber from here. I can drag their hound back to them and let him bleed his confession on their marble, he said, and give them proof that you've been moving outside their designs for months, she countered. They'll spin it as you undermining the sacred balance of power. He stopped pacing, looking at her as if really seeing her for the first time since he'd arrived. You've thought this through, he said. I spend a great deal of time thinking, given how often you leave me alone with my own company, she replied dryly. His mouth twitched, pain and reluctant amusement tangled together. Fair. So think now, she pressed. If they're desperate enough to come after me directly, it means something at court has shifted. Either they've lost power somewhere else and need a visible victory, or they've gained something and feel arrogant. Or both, he said grimly. Either way, reacting with open fury will give them leverage, she said. They'll whisper that the bond has finally unbalanced you, that your attachment to your unsuitable queen has become a liability. She put as much scorn into the council's phrasing as she could. Rowan's jaw clenched. You are not unsuitable, he said. I was born outside the high houses, she said. They've then never forgiven you for choosing a girl whose parents raised horses instead of armies. I chose a woman the moon chose, he replied. Then I was a coward with what I did with that choice. The quiet admission knocked the breath from her lungs. What did you just say? She whispered. He dragged a hand through his hair. Pacing again. I said I was a coward, he muttered. Is that the confession you want? Fine. I looked at you that night and felt the bond hit, and I thought, if I accept this, if I take what the moon is offering me, I will lose the one thing I need most to keep this kingdom from tearing itself apart. Which was? She asked, voice barely audible. Distance, he said. From everyone. From everything. A king who can be wounded is a king the council can use. I thought if I denied the bond, if I held you at arm's length, they'd never find the place to put the knife. And instead, she said, throat tight, you put it there yourself. His step faltered. Elara, I know why you did it, she said, surprising herself with the realization as she spoke it. I think I've always known, somewhere under the hurt. You were 20 when they crowned you. You watched your father die with a council blade in his back. Of course you learned to make yourself stone. He stared at her, the wolf's gold leaching back into the grey. I did not account for what it would do to you. No, she agreed. You didn't. Silence again. This one felt different. Not a stone wall, but a cliff edge. Outside, someone shouted a command in the distance, the sound faint through the cabin walls. The outpost was waking fully. Soldiers changing shifts, the ordinary machine of border life grinding into motion. Inside, everything felt balanced on the edge of something sharp. What do you want, Elara? Rowan asked quietly. She blinked. What? What do you want? He repeated. From me, from this situation. If the council thinks they can banish you and replace you, they are wrong. But how we respond, how I respond matters. And you are the one they are trying to cut out of the picture. No one at court had ever asked her that. Not the council, who saw her as a pawn. Not the nobles, who saw her as an obstacle. Not even Rowan, who had spoken often of what the kingdom needed, but rarely of what she did. She considered the question carefully. I want to live, she said first. Preferably not as prey. I want the wolves who come for me to learn they chose the wrong target. A flash of approval lit his eyes. I want the council to choke on the thought that they almost killed their queen, she continued, heat building. I want them to realize that the wilds they thought they could exile me to are mine now, and that every alpha who answers to this border will answer to me first. You want power, he said. She met his gaze steadily. I want to stop pretending I don't already have it. His lips curved, something fierce unfurling there. Good. And you? She asked, because turnabout was fair. He hesitated, then stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she had to tip her head back to hold his gaze. I want you alive, he said, each word deliberate. I want the council afraid of what happens when you walk back into the capital at my side, instead of disappearing quietly into the north. And I want... He trailed off. You want? She prompted, heart pounding. He looked at her as if the answer hurt. I want a world in which I am allowed to reach for you without worrying who will die, because I let myself be a man for 5 breaths instead of a king. The admission cracked something in her. Longing surged up, bright and wild, warring with the old, wary hurt. You're the one who decided you couldn't be both, she whispered. I know, he said. And I have been wrong in ways I don't know how to fix without breaking everything else. Her voice barely carried. You start by not letting them kill me. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't sounded so strained. That part I can manage. A knock at the window jerked them both back. Elara turned. A small shape peered through the glass, the outpost commander. A compact woman with grey-shot hair and eyes that missed nothing. When Rowan unlatched the window, she leaned in. Apologies for the intrusion, Your Majesty, she said. nodding to Rowan before inclining her head to Elara. "Your Grace, we've secured the prisoner in the lower cells. He's already started talking." Rowan's shoulders coiled. And you're not going to like it," the commander said. "He claims he was acting under collective instruction. No single name, just the council. But there was one phrase he kept repeating." Elara's skin prickled. "What phrase?" The commander's gaze flicked to her, then back to Rowan, as if asking permission to speak openly in front of the Queen. Rowan nodded once. "Say it." "Remove the moon's mistake before the eclipse," the commander said. Silence slammed into the room. Elara felt the words like a physical blow. Moon's mistake, the council's favorite whispered name for her when they thought she couldn't hear. Before the eclipse. "The eclipse is in 3 nights, Rowan said, voice gone flat. 2.5, the commander corrected. "Clouds won't hide it. Sia says it'll be clear the whole time." Rowan swore under his breath. Elara's mind raced. An eclipse meant heightened magic. Older rites. The kind of night where any ritual, any binding or breaking carried twice its usual weight. "They're planning something," she said. The commander snorted. "They always are. But this time, they rushed. Your hound was sloppy, like you said. Panic makes people stupid." "Or bold," Rowan muttered. Elara forced herself to focus. "What did he say about the removal?" she asked. "Was he meant to kill me here? Or drag me somewhere?" The commander's mouth tightened. He had chains with him. Silvered. Too small for a full-shifted Wolf. Just right for a human body. A shiver crawled down Elara's spine. "Not just death, then. Capture. Ritual. What do you want us to do, Your Majesty?" The commander asked Rowan. "We can hold him. But if you mean to make a move on the council, we'll need a plan that doesn't get us all labeled traitors." Rowan glanced at Elara. She drew a breath, letting the fear and fury settle into something colder, sharper. "You said they fear me," she said to Rowan. "Let's give them a reason." His eyes lit with something dark and satisfied. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking we let the council believe their little border plan is working just long enough to draw out whoever else they've sent," she said. "We set our own trap on the eclipse instead of waiting to spring theirs." The commander's brows rose. "Using yourself as bait, Your Grace." Elara met her gaze steadily. "They've already decided I'm the prey. I'd rather choose my own ground." Rowan's lips curved slowly. A dangerous smile. "I knew there was a reason the moon chose you," he murmured. "Flattery will not get you out of explaining why you left me in the capital for years with only half the truth," she said. "It wasn't meant as flattery," he replied. "It was an apology in disguise." She shook her head, a reluctant flicker of warmth threading through the cold. "Your disguises need work." The commander cleared her throat. "If you two are done discussing marital strategy, I'd like to know whether I am positioning my archers on the ridge or the tree line." "Both," Elara and Rowan said at the same time. They blinked at each other. Then, despite everything, the attempted assassination, the council's letter, the looming eclipse, Elara felt a laugh bubble up, small and incredulous. "Maybe we can be both," she thought suddenly. "Maybe the moon didn't make a mistake, and the council was just terrified it didn't." "We'll need to brief the local alphas," Rowan said, turning back to the commander. "Quietly. No letters, no messengers the council can intercept. Face to face only. We can call a moot tonight," the commander said. "There's a full patrol due in from the Western Gorge. We'll say it's for border strategy. No one will blink." "Do it," Rowan ordered. The commander nodded and withdrew, leaving them alone again. Elara exhaled slowly. You're sure about this? Rowan asked, voice softer now. Letting them come for you again. They're coming whether I'm sure or not, she said. This way, at least, I'm looking them in the eye when they try. His gaze dropped briefly to her hand, to the faint silvered mark on her palm where the moon's blessing had first seared the bond into her skin. He looked like he wanted to touch it, to trace the mark, to see if it still burned. He didn't. Then we do it your way, he said. Something in her settled at that. For years, she had been the quiet presence at his side, offering counsel the council often pretended they didn't hear. Here, in this cramped cabin with danger closing in, he was choosing her strategy first. Rowan, she said softly. He looked up. When this is over, she said. When the council is done trying to erase me. What then? The question hung between them, heavier than any letter. His eyes held hers, unflinching. Then we decide, he said. Not the council. Not the prophecy. Not the ghosts of our fathers. Just us. Her heart thudded once hard. And if we decide differently, she asked, then I will live with it, he said. But I will have at least given you the choice I should have given you 7 years ago. Choice. It was more than she'd ever been offered. Outside, the sounds of the outpost grew louder, boots on packed earth. Shouted orders. The distant clang of steel on steel as someone ran drills. Inside, the cabin felt like the center of something about to break open. Elara squared her shoulders. Then let's survive the eclipse first, she said, and give the council a night they won't forget. Rowan's smile this time was small and true. As my queen commands. He bowed an actual bow, not the half-nod of formality he gave her at court. When he straightened, there was a new light in his eyes. Not the distant gleam of a king looking over his kingdom. The focused, hungry gaze of a man who had just realized what he might lose, and what he might still have time to fight for. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The outpost moved like a beast rousing from sleep. Elara stood on the ridge above the training yard that afternoon, cloaks snapping around her boots as soldiers shifted below, swapping practice swords for real steel. The air tasted of iron and pine sap, of fur and sweat, and the faint sharp tang of old magic buried in the mountain's bones. Rowan watched from her shoulder close enough that the heat of him anchored her far enough that if anyone looked up they would see 2 rulers side by side, not a king leaning into his queen, as if she were the steadier ground. They're yours, he said quietly, nodding toward the wolves assembling in the yard. Say what you mean to do. She drew a breath, letting her voice drop into the tone she used in council chambers when she wanted men twice her age to stop speaking and listen. Commander, she called. The grey-haired woman below glanced up, barked a sharp order, and the yard stilled. Dozens of eyes turned toward the ridge. Your Grace, the commander replied. We're ready. Elara stepped forward until her boots grated against the stone edge. The council sent a hound for your queen in the night, she said. No preamble. They will send more. They call me the moon's mistake. They plan to correct it under the eclipse. A low growl moved through the assembled wolves, a ripple of outrage. You owe me nothing, Elara went on. I was given this crown by treaty and prophecy, not by your oaths. But I will tell you what I intend. She felt Rowan's attention sharpen, hot as a brand against her side. I intend to stand in the open on eclipse night, she said. I will give the council the illusion they want. A queen alone in the wilds, far from their marble, performing a rite they can twist for themselves. They will come for me. They've already tried. They will try again. I would rather choose where they spill their intentions. The commander's mouth curled faintly. A few of the younger wolves straightened, something like pride lighting their faces. So we let them think you're unguarded, the commander said. And when they step into your shadow, we close the jaws. Elara finished. She nodded toward the western line of trees, where the mountain fell away into a narrow gorge. There's a stone circle on the plateau above the gorge. Old moonwork. The seer wrote to me about it years ago, when she was still allowed to write at all. Rowan's head snapped toward her. You never told me that. You never asked what she said in her letters, Elara replied, keeping her eyes on the yard. It's a place where vows settle deeper, where lies sink faster. We'll use it. The commander spat thoughtfully over the rail. Archers in the tree line, sentries on the gorge lip, alphas in the circle shadows. She mused. Let the council's pets walk themselves into a ring they think is meant for you. And I? Rowan asked, low. Elara turned to him then. You stand where everyone can see you, she said. Not as their weapon, as mine. If this is to work, they have to believe that even with you there, they can finish what they started. Panic breeds arrogance. His mouth curved, dangerous and fond all at once. As my queen commands, he said again. The next 2 days blurred, not in a way that broke time, but in the way a blade passes cleanly through cloth. Runners went out under false errands. Small knots of soldiers slipped into the trees in pairs and threes, vanishing into the mountain's folds where council eyes could not follow. The commander rode with Elara to the plateau at dusk, showing her the stone circle. 12 rough pillars blackened with age, ringed by knee-high slabs etched with old sigils. Elara laid her palm against the nearest stone. The moon's mark on her skin warmed as if in greeting. This is good ground, she thought. Let them come here. At night, back in the cabin, she and Rowan bent over maps spread across the table, fingers tracing lines of approach. If they're smart, they'll send a mixed group, Elara said, tapping a spot between the ridge and the northern tree line. One with court polish to speak for them, and enough claws to make their threat look real. Baron won't come himself, Rowan said. He'll send a proxy he thinks is expendable. And we'll make sure that proxy sings his name anyway, she replied. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same inkwell. The bond responded like a struck chord. Heat slid up her arm. Rowan's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. He didn't pull away. Elara, he said quietly. She did not look up from the map. If you apologize again, I'm going to move my pieces without you. He huffed out a breath that was half laugh, half exhale. Then don't let me waste the words I have left, he said. Strategy first. Sentences that cost us both sleep later. Her mouth curved despite herself. Agreed. On the night of the eclipse, the mountain held its breath. Elara stood at the center of the stone circle, the world reduced to rough rock under her boots and the midnight blue of her cloak pooling around her feet. The moon rode high above, a pale coin waiting for the shadow creeping inexorably across the sky. Torches ringed the outer edge of the clearing, their light carefully banked. Beyond them, the pines loomed as dark sentinels. Somewhere within that darkness crouched archers with arrows notched, wolves ready to shift at the commander's hand signal. Alphas from the border packs standing like shadows among shadows. Rowan took his place a few paces behind her, to the right. Not in front, not above. At her shoulder. If anything feels wrong, you step back and I step forward, he murmured. If anything feels wrong, we step together, she corrected. He went very still. Then slowly he nodded. Together it is. The first of the council's wolves arrived before the moon's edge had begun to darken. They came on foot and horseback, cloaked figures melting out of the trees, boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. At their head walked a man in council robes, the old unity rune stitched in silver over his heart. Not Varon, a proxy, as Rowan had predicted. Elara recognized him nonetheless. Councillor Yeren, the one who always spoke of necessary sacrifices, with dry, untroubled eyes. Yaren stopped just outside the ring of stones, gaze sweeping over Elara, then Rowan, then the circle itself. "Your Majesty," he said, inclining his head toward Rowan. "Your Grace." His mouth twisted faintly on the title. "How rural you look, framed by granite." "Careful," Rowan said softly. "These rural stones have longer memories than your marble." Jaren's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We come with the council's blessing," he said, "and their concern. There are whispers, that the Queen has been compromised by border life, that she has forgotten where her duty lies." Elara lifted her chin. "I sleep on wooden boards and breathe pine," she said. "It's still the North. Or has the council decided that only the capital counts as real?" A murmur rustled through the wolves behind Yaren. His jaw tightened. "The council has decided that certain imbalances must be corrected before the eclipse magnifies them," he said. "The bond between you and His Majesty has always been unusual. The seers warned us. Prophecies can be misread. The moon, for all her wisdom, can make choices that threaten the realm." There it was. The insult they'd only ever whispered behind pillars, spoken aloud under the open sky. Jaren's gaze fixed on Elara. "We are here to remove the moon's mistake," he said. Her heart lurched. She let the words settle instead of flinching. "By what right?" she asked calmly. "By the will of those entrusted with the kingdom's stability," Yaren replied. "The council has voted. You will lay down your claim to the throne. Your bond will be ritually severed, and His Majesty will take a secondary consort to ensure the line." Rowan laughed once. It was not a pleasant sound. "There will be no secondary consort," he said, voice quiet and lethal. "Not while I breathe." Jaren's gaze flicked to him. "Even a king cannot stand alone against the council," he said. "You have been reluctant to accept our guidance in this, Your Majesty. But there are other ways to persuade you." He gestured, and two of the cloaked wolves behind him stepped forward, carrying a length of chain between them. Silver glinted in the torchlight. Elara's stomach knotted. "Bind her," Yaren said. "We'll need her conscious for the rite, but not free." Rowan surged forward, a growl tearing from his chest. The air thickened with the force of his aura, the wolf in him snapping, ready to shred. Elara lifted a hand, stopping him with a touch to his arm. "Let them try," she murmured. His eyes, bright gold now, bored into hers. For a heartbeat, it was just them in the circle. No counselor, no traitors, no watching archers. He searched her face, found her certainty, and forced himself back to stillness with visible effort. "As my queen commands," he said again, this time a promise wrapped around a threat. The two wolves with the chain stepped into the circle. The moment their boots crossed the invisible line where the old sigils ringed the stones, the air changed. The moon's mark on Elara's palm burned. Beneath the thin layer of soil, ancient lines carved into rock flared faintly, unseen by most eyes, but not by hers. She took one step forward, enough that the chain brushed her cloak. "I am the moon's mistake," she said softly, letting her voice carry. "That is what you call me." Jaren's smile sharpened. "At last we agree on something." Elara tilted her head as if considering. "The thing about mistakes," she said, "is that sometimes they are the only honest thing in a room full of careful lies." She opened her marked hand. The sigils carved into the stones answered. Light shot up from the ring at her feet, pale and sudden, racing along the carved lines like water finding its path. The wolves holding the chain jerked as it seared their palms, the silver heating under their fingers. They dropped it with twin curses. From the tree line, the commander's voice cut through the night. "Now!" Archers stepped from the shadows as one, bows drawn, arrows trained on the ring of council wolves. Shapes blurred as border alphas dropped into their wolf forms, fur rippling under starlight, teeth bared in a circle of their own. Jaren's composure cracked. "What is this?" he snapped. "This," Elara said, "is a queen on her own ground, and a king who has finally stopped pretending he stands alone." Rowan stepped up beside her, his presence filling the circle. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command that made lesser wolves drop to their knees. "Kneel," he ordered the council's hounds. Some resisted, muscles straining as they fought the instinct baked into their bones. Most didn't. One by one they sank, forced down by the combined pressure of Rowan's will and the old magic humming in the stones. Yeren staggered, grabbing for the nearest pillar. "You dare turn ancient rites into a trap?" he hissed. "You were the ones who tried to use them to murder your queen," Elara said. "If anyone has twisted the sacred, it's you." She nodded to the commander. "Take their weapons. No one dies unless they force it." The commander's grin was fierce. "You heard her grace," she called. "Break their pride, not their necks." In the controlled chaos that followed wolves disarming wolves, shackles snapping shut on the same silver chains meant for her, Yeren tried once, desperately, to rally. "The council will not forgive this." He spat at Rowan. "You think this border rabble can protect you from the consequences?" Rowan's eyes were molten gold. "I don't need protection from consequences," he said. "Only from cowardice. And I'm done letting yours dictate how I rule." He reached out, fisted a hand in Jaren's robe, and yanked him closer until their faces were a breath apart. "You will tell me who voted for this," Rowan said softly. "You will repeat in front of witnesses every word Veron whispered to you when he sent you here. You will give me, in exquisite detail, the names of every counselor who called my queen a mistake. Do you understand?" Yeren swallowed, sweat standing out on his brow. "And if I refuse?" Rowan's smile was all wolf. "The stones here make it very hard to lie," he murmured. "The seers used to use them for oaths. We can rediscover old traditions together." Elara stepped closer, her voice cool. "Refusal is a choice," she said. "It simply comes with a different kind of pain." Yeren looked between them, the king whose patience had finally snapped, the queen standing calm in the center of the circle she claimed. Something in him broke. "Varon," he whispered. It was Varon. He said the realm needed stability. That removing you would give the king freedom to bind himself to a more suitable house. He called you the moon's misstep. Said the eclipse would. Correct the line. The words hung in the cold air. A confession and a noose. Elara let herself feel the hurt for one heartbeat. Then she set it aside. "He's just given you all the rope you need," she said to Rowan quietly. Rowan released Yeren to the commander's guards, then turned to face the ring of watching alphas, soldiers, and archers. "You have heard the council's intentions," he said, voice carrying across the stones. "You have seen their methods. Let it be known from this night that any who speak of a secondary consort, any who act on such a plan, commit treason against the crown and against the moon's own choice." He reached for Elara's hand in full view of everyone. The bond surged, bright as the first time. "I have one queen," Rowan said, the words ringing over the clearing. "Chosen by prophecy, by bond, and—" He looked down at her, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "By me. I should have said that years ago. Hear me now. There will be no other." The old ache in her chest cracked wide open. The moon's shadow began to slide over her own face then, the first thin bite taken from its brightness. The eclipse had started. As darkness crept across the sky, the stones around them thrummed. Elara felt the magic coil tighter, like a held breath. She squeezed Rowan's hand once and stepped forward on her own. "By this eclipse," she said, lifting her marked palm, "I claim the title the council tried to twist. I am the moon's mistake. Yes, but not because she chose wrong. Because she chose something they cannot control." The mark on her palm flared silver. "I am Elara of Thorn," she went on, voice steady. "Queen of the North in truth. Wardness of these wilds by will. Mate to the Alpha King by bond. Any who would question that may step into this circle and try." No one moved. One by one, the border alphas dropped to a knee instead. Heads bowed. The commander knelt last, grin sharp as a blade. Rowan lowered himself with them. Not because he had to. Because he chose to. The sight stole Elara's breath more than any council threat. When the moon was fully veiled, they bound Yeren and his wolves for transport, and set a double guard on them. The archers melted back into the trees. The alphas rose and began to fan out to their posts, grim satisfaction in their eyes. Elara and Rowan walked back to the cabin in silence. The path lit only by the strange half-light of the eclipsed moon, and the steady glow of the bond humming between them. Inside, the small space felt almost unchanged, same battered table, same narrow bed, same rug worn thin by years of feet. And yet everything had shifted. Rowan closed the door, leaning his back against it for a moment. "You were..." He broke off, searching for a word. "Reckless?" she offered. "Brilliant," he said. Heat rose to her cheeks. "Don't look so surprised." "I'm not," he said. "I'm furious with myself for how long I let them dim you." She studied him. The shadows under his eyes. The tension in his shoulders wound tight for so long it might never fully unwind. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said slowly, "I send word to the capital that their hound failed and lives. That he is coming home with a mouth full of truths. Varon will scramble. The council will fracture. And for the first time in years, they will be the ones on the defensive." "And us?" she asked quietly. He pushed off the door and came to stand in front of her. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back again. "And us," he said. "We take the time I stole from us and decide what to do with it." His hand hovered near her cheek, not quite touching. "If you want to walk away when this is done," he said, voice rough, "I will give you land, freedom, anything you ask, and I will not follow. You deserve that choice. But if there is any part of you that still wants..." He swallowed. "Us," she supplied, because leaving the word hanging hurt more. He nodded once. "Then I will spend whatever years the moon gives me trying to be a man who does not make you regret it." Silence stretched. Her heart hammered loud enough that she was sure he could hear it. "I don't forgive 7 years of distance in one night," she said softly. "I would distrust you if you did," he replied. "But," she went on, "I saw you on my floor. I saw you in that circle. I heard you choose me out loud. And she drew a breath. "I'm tired of wanting you alone." His eyes burned. "So we start there," she said. "Not as king and queen. As two very stubborn wolves who have a great deal to learn about sharing the same bed without burning the world down." One corner of his mouth lifted. "About the bed," he said, glancing past her. She followed his gaze to the narrow mattress. "You're not sleeping on the floor," she said firmly. "Elara, you've bled on my planks once already," she cut in. "If the council sends more hounds, I would rather your back not be broken before they arrive." Something like hope flickered across his face, quickly masked. "I can take the chair," he offered. "You can take the left side," she said. "If," she added, holding up a finger, "you can manage to lie down without pretending we're strangers sharing a corridor bench." A short, disbelieving laugh escaped him. "You're asking a lot." "I know," she said. I always have. He stepped closer until there was no space left between them but breath. Stay very still, he murmured. Her pulse stumbled. Why? Because if you move, I might lose my courage, he said. And then, finally, he closed the last inch. His mouth brushed hers, tentative as a question, then firmer when she didn't pull away. The bond flared, not as a burn this time, but as warmth spilling through every hollow place in her chest. It wasn't the desperate, all-consuming kiss she'd imagined in lonely nights. It was better, careful, reverent, an apology and a vow all at once. When he drew back, his forehead rested against hers. We have battles left, he said softly. The council won't fall in a single night. I know, she replied. Good. I'd be bored without something to outthink. He huffed a quiet laugh. But whatever they try next, she added, they'll be coming for both of us now. That's their mistake. Our advantage, he corrected. She nodded. They lay down side by side on the narrow bed, bodies careful not to crowd, fingers tangling in the space between them. Outside, the moon began to shrug off the shadow, light returning in slow, silver increments. Inside the cabin, two wolves who had spent years circling each other finally breathed in the same rhythm. Whatever came next, council wars, old prophecies, new threats. Elara knew one thing with the same certainty she'd felt when the bond first flared. She was no one's mistake. She was the choice they had not planned for. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.